On that same trip, we were at a campground somewhere and baby needed to eat. And so I was kind of sitting off to the side because there was nowhere private to go. And I had a receiving blanket kind of covering her and was nursing her as discreetly as I could. And some random older gentleman came up, while I was there, and he said, I don't want to be rude, but I just wanted to say you just have the most peaceful expression on your face. And I just think it's beautiful what you're doing there.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 141. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. I help moms with breastfeeding. I want to start off today's show by sharing something that has been weighing heavy on my mind. Every show, I ask my guests to share their stories. For many of my guests, I know that it can be a hard thing to do, as this puts them in a very vulnerable place. And typically, this degree of sharing makes my guests feel uncomfortable, and yet they are highly motivated to do so, as they think it is more important to share the truth and to educate other women than it is to keep quiet. I am going to put myself in a very vulnerable place with you. Nothing earth-shattering, mind you, but nevertheless makes me feel uncomfortable. I've had quite a few guests on this show that when asked the question, if you wrapped your arms around your postpartum self, what would you say to yourself? While the specifics of the responses have been different, the overall message has been pretty much the same. They are saying, this is one of the hardest jobs you will ever do, is to be a mom. Babies do not come with manuals or rule books. Others who are not in your place may tell you what to do and what worked for them, but you are your own very special person, and your baby is his or her own special little person. Overwhelmingly, almost everyone I've interviewed has said, take things slow. Be kind to yourself. It is okay to not get as much done as you would like to do, as you think you should do, and what others think you should be doing. Don't worry so much about what others think. Overwhelmingly, their advice has been that if they had to do it all over again, they would not be in such a rush to get back to their usual life. They would take more time to just sit on their couch and cuddle with their baby with no particular agenda of what they needed to be doing next. They would enjoy gazing at their baby and listening to their little noises they make and staring at their cute facial expressions they make. They would not be in such a rush to finish breastfeeding so they could get on to the next task. One of the most common words of wisdom my guests have said that they would do different is ask for help. Most of my guests have said they would have put plans in place to ask for help so they could get in some naps and take a shower more than once a week. They would have accepted meals and other help from loved ones. Many have said that they learned that it's okay to say no to people, and they definitely will with the next baby. It is okay to say I'm not ready yet to get back into the swing of things. It's okay to turn away visitors when you're not up to it. It is okay to admit that you're struggling, and that it is more than okay, and it's a sign of strength to actually ask for help. My guests now know that the reality is this is temporary, this time flies by so quickly, and that the things that you were in a rush to accomplish probably could have waited a while longer. I've been struggling with some work-related issues, and I've been pushing through, staying up until all hours, working through weekends, all things that I know are not good for my mental and physical health. Just as I did as a new mom, I convinced myself that certain things just had to be done. I made commitments to myself and to others. I am in a group of other business people, and we are holding each other accountable. While on the one hand, my husband laughs at me when I'm struggling and asks me why I do this to myself, I always have the same answer. As hard as it is, being in the accountability group helps me to reach certain goals that I set out for myself. And yet, try as I might, I realize that I'm failing myself. Just like when I was a new mother, I could clearly see that what I was doing was not working. And yet, I carried on because, because I thought I had to. And I'm ashamed to say that I wasn't reaching the goals and didn't want to tell anybody. As I was listening to my interview with one of my most recent guests, some of her words reached my very core. She said, "I don't even know why I felt the need to keep going, even when it was just too hard, and it was clearly not working. After all, I realized there's no boss giving me an evaluation. There was no one knocking on my door, giving me a trophy for a job well done." My guest who said this, she was Carrie Northington. And I want to tell her right here, Carrie, you are so right about that. There's no one knocking on my door giving me a trophy and saying, "Good job, Lori." These pearls of wisdom are good for us to hear, no matter what stage of life we're in and what we're doing. I felt like I was hit over the head with a ton of bricks as I related it to my current state of craziness. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about my new membership site that I've been talking to you about, all about mothering. I know I've been talking about it for over a month. I've asked you to check out my homepage. I've asked you to join, and I've told you that while the site was not complete, that you could still join. I invited you to be a founding member. I thought this would be really cool and a lot of fun for both you and I. I thought it would be cool to get input from you as I added onto the site. And each week, I think, this week, all the bells and whistles are going to be added to the site. Some really cool features are on the site for you to check out, and you're going to love it. And each week, it is a fail with capital letters. Things go wrong with technology, and it puts me behind weeks. I'm back and forth with tech people trying to help me fix it or figure it out, and at the end of each week, I realize I still do not have a product that I feel good about releasing. But I just keep pushing through because I feel like I should finish what I started and finish when I said I would. Launch this site, press go, give you all the programs I've been promising. And each week, it's not anywhere near where it should be. But I've been putting on a smiling face for the rest of the world and pretending it's all okay. I'm okay, the site is okay, and all along, I have this dirty little secret. The membership site is far from ready, and I have not been truthful to myself. Like I said, earth-shattering, this is not. Postpartum depression, this is not. However, I do take my responsibility as the host of this podcast all about breastfeeding and the owner of All About Mothering very seriously. And as such, I have not done what I set out to do or what I told you I was going to do. I'm pulling away the covers, letting you know what's going on. Anyone who has joined so far has received a personal email from me. Now that I've gotten that off my chest, pun definitely intended, I am here to say that I am holding off launching this fabulous membership site all about mothering, and I have a brand new launch date, April 1st, 2017. I decided to give myself some breathing room to make sure all systems are ready to go for you, and when the site opens its doors, it will be ready. Thanks for your understanding about the delay. I will definitely update you as things move along. You're also welcome to go to All About Mothering homepage. Once there, you will be able to sign up to get a notice a few days before the site opens. You will want to do this because only those on the email list will be eligible to win some fun prizes on opening day. I have some really cool gifts for you, and the biggest gifts will be a 1-year full membership for one lucky winner who registers the first day. You will be fully reimbursed your full fee, but you need to be on the email list, so just go to allaboutmothering.com. Oy vey, that was hard for me to do because I like to keep my word and I hate not keeping my word. But just like when I was a new mother, at a certain point, I had to sit down and admit to myself that I was struggling, humble myself, and come up with a new plan, a workable plan, so I could move forward. Interestingly enough, today's guest, Laura, is one of the members in my accountability group that I refer to. She's also a fellow podcaster, and also, interestingly enough, her podcast is called The Productive Woman. I almost did not go through this whole reveal when I realized that how would it look if I started talking about how I didn't get a big project done on the same show with Laura, who talks all about being productive. Then I remembered that while Laura is all about being productive, she is also all about us finding our own way and supporting each other. And more importantly, she believes that we also have to make it okay to take a step back from time to time and reassess and reevaluate. And that is perfectly fine to not strive to be perfect all the time. Laura understands that we can kill ourselves trying to hold up to such high standards. And she understands that life has a way of getting in our way at times. I realize that if anyone understands, Laura surely will. And you will find that out in getting to know her better during today's show. On that note, let's get started. Laura McClellan has been married over 37 years to the same man. She says she was a child bride. She's mom to 5, grandmother to 7, and an attorney in a large Dallas law firm. After hours, she hosts The Productive Woman, a weekly podcast about productivity for busy women. Laura, I would love to welcome you to the All About Breastfeeding show.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Excellent. I always think it's fun to learn a little bit of background about the person that we're going to be spending some time with. So can you please share with us what life was like for you when you were a little girl, and tell us a little bit about the family that you grew up in?
Well, it's interesting, I guess. I'm the oldest of, 6 kids. At the time I was growing up, mostly there were just 4 of us. My dad was a log truck driver. My mom kind of took care of us and would work part-time at various things. Didn't have a lot of money, but I don't think we knew it when we were kids. Kids are kind of oblivious to stuff. We moved around a lot, but I was always kind of the bookworm, the responsible oldest kid. And like I said, there were the 4 of us until I was about 13. And I'll never forget this because I had been telling my mom I thought she should have another baby. And the 4 of us were real close in age. So, it was like 13, 12, 11, and 10 or something like that at that point. I'd been telling my mom I thought she should have another baby, and I promised I would take care of it if she did. And then around the time I was 12 or 13, she announced that she was going to have another baby. And I always thought she had done that for me. So number 5, my younger sister came along, and then a few years later, my parents divorced. And sometime after that, my mom remarried. And when I was 18, she had number 6, my half sister. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it was, just a big, noisy family.
Yeah, no, it just always makes it for interesting when there's divorces and remarriage and then siblings. And I mean, I find that I guess it's about 50-50 when people say it worked out really nicely and it was one big family and everybody was able to get along. Not only that, to thrive. And, you know, for some others, maybe it didn't turn out so well. But it's always interesting just to learn about different families and move away from the traditional mother, father, two children picket fence, because it's just so long past that, right?
Yeah, that's really true. And, you know, in our case, while I loved my dad, you know, looking back as an adult, he was an alcoholic his entire life. And so although he was a high functioning alcoholic in that he worked very hard as a log truck driver, he worked long hours and all that, but we moved around a lot. He was always one of those who thought the grass was going to be greener somewhere else. And so we moved many times, and being kind of a quiet introvert bookworm, it was always really hard for me when we moved. But my mom did a great job of kind of making home for us wherever we were. And
yeah, and as an adult with your own children, you can appreciate how difficult that must have been for your mother.
Yeah. And we've had conversations about it since then. You know, she now lives pretty close to where we live outside of Dallas. And, you know, we've talked about what life was like for her. Because, you know, as a kid, you don't think about any of that.
Right.
You know, it's all about me and how am I experiencing this. But, you know, as I grew up and became a mom myself, and now, you know, I've got adult kids, it really kind of hit home to me of what a challenge it was for her to be raising those kids, all of us kids, in many ways kind of by herself. Because my dad, like I said, he came home at night, but he was a dreamer, and it was a traditional family in the sense that my dad didn't really do much around the house.
Yeah, well, he worked hard, he brought home the money, and then probably almost everything else was left up to your mother to do.
Yep, I think that's really the case. And she really was the glue that held the family together all those years.
And I find it is actually kind of interesting and fun that as we get older, I know I get more curious, and then I start asking my mother more. Well, I start saying to her, well, how did you and why did you?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it from an adult point of view and a mother of children's point of view now. And you get to look at your parents in a very different way, too.
Very much so.
So the bookworm in you, so you are an attorney now. Is that something you always dreamed of becoming?
You know, it really wasn't. It was something that never occurred to me until, maybe when I was in high school, and an English teacher that I had commented that she thought I'd make a good lawyer because I love to read and I like to talk. And I guess I was a pretty good arguer even when I was in high school. But at the time, I thought, well, that would be cool, but people like me don't become lawyers. That's for rich kids. And I was not a rich kid. As I said, we grew up moving around a lot, never had a lot of money, and I wasn't even sure how I was going to go to college other than I was hoping for scholarships. So it just never occurred to me. And I didn't actually go to law school until I was in my mid-30s and already had 5 kids. I did everything kind of backwards.
Well, sometimes backwards works out for the best.
I think that's true.
You know, one of the things I want to share with my audience is that I'm so incredibly interested in talking to you for many reasons. And one of them is a bit of a selfish reason in that I remember when we connected and you were like, oh, my kids are older and, you know, what can I really bring to the table here? And I think that you could bring so much just information and take a look at things. And in hindsight, you can take a look back at, you know, the way that you mothered your children. And we're going to be talking about breastfeeding and birthing. And there's so many times when mothers, we are just so much in the thick of it. Like when my kids were younger and I was doing different things differently than the next 5 women or than my parents thought I should be doing. And I would always say, you know, they would always challenge me. And I would always say, you know what, I don't have any guarantees. I don't know how this is actually going to pan out, but I just know that it feels right for me. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing different things like breastfeeding for a longer period than anybody ever thought, the kids were sleeping with me, various other things. It was like, you're going to have these dependent little children. They're never going to want to go to school. They're never going to, you know, leave your apron strings. And my parents could totally see that they did. And there were definitely times when, I questioned things as I parented them because you just don't know. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of mothers now, I know, and not that I think I know, because they're constantly questioning, if I breastfeed my baby for this long, will they really become dependent? What does it really mean? Are they ever going to leave the bed? And they're constantly questioning. And sometimes they question so much that they actually change the way that they parent because fears have set in about what might be down the road. And so this is why I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to you, because you do have all those years of experience and you're going to get to tell us how it unfolded, how your 5 children got to become independent. They weren't always under your apron string. So they were there as long as they needed to. And then on their own time, they did fly out on their own, and how it all does work out. So when we are more of I never even used the words when my kids were young, but the most common terminology now is when we're attachment parenting, breastfeeding our kids, keeping them close, maybe sleeping with them, all those kind of various attachment parenting things, baby wearing. Parents do worry that their kids will be too dependent upon them. And I know that you got stories to tell, and you're going to tell us a bit about your kids, and maybe even if you had insecurities about how you were going about things. So I just want my audience to know that I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you, thrilled to be able to hear your experiences. And the first thing that I would like to talk about, I always ask my guests, have you ever had the conversation with your mother and asked her if you were breastfed?
I never have. I didn't have a chance to, when you sent me kind of a heads up of what some of the questions you might be asking would be, I thought, I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to ask my mom. And I haven't had a chance to talk to her about it. So I don't know. I'm guessing no. I was born in 1960, and it was pretty typical to bottle feed and those sorts of things back in that day. And I don't remember her breastfeeding my younger sister that was born when I was 13. So I'm guessing I was not.
Okay, well, it'll be one of those things that you're going to do one of those, by the way, on your next phone call, I bet.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about your breastfeeding experience. And you have 5 children. So I think I don't know that we're going to get through all of them, but I'd love for you to I'd love for you to at least share with me your breastfeeding experience with your first baby. And I'm always interested to know if it's something that you just knew you were going to do when you had a baby, or if you learned a few things during your pregnancy and you said, you know what, I think this is how I'd like to feed my baby. And then if you did any research or reading or video watching, or if you hung out with other moms who were breastfeeding. And so what you knew and learned and thought about breastfeeding before you actually had your baby.
Yeah, that's a great question, because as you know, I married young. Mike and I were 18 when we got married, and we were 20 when our first child was born. And I was not at home at that time. So my mom was not the biggest influence on some of these decisions at that time. But I still have a friend named Vicky who was just a few years older than me and was married before I was, had her first child when I was still in high school. And she kind of became my role model as to what I thought a mom should be like in a lot of ways. I sort of learned from her how to be a young wife and then a young mom. She breastfed her child, and that was the big influence on me. And so I think it never occurred to me that I wouldn't breastfeed, because if it was what Vicky did, I was sure it was the right thing to do. That being said, because I'm a bookworm and a nerd, I researched the heck out of it. Everything related to pregnancy and childbirth and child rearing and everything. I read every book I could find. This was back in the dark ages, so there were not, online videos. I didn't have a computer. But I certainly talked to Vicky about it a lot, and some of the other young moms that I knew, and read tons and tons of books. As a result of all my research, I had made the decision while I was pregnant that I didn't want medication when I gave birth, which is not a, commentary on other women's choices. I firmly believe that every mom needs to make her own decisions about what's right for her and her children. And I got no judgment on anybody else's choices. But for me, I'd made a decision that I didn't want, drugs when I was giving birth, and B, I was going to breastfeed my child. And, those were just my decisions.
Now, Laura, I'm curious, and I totally get that you're not judging anybody, nor should anybody else, and I totally agree. I am curious, do you remember what it is from your reading that you said, I really want to avoid drugs during labor?
Well, because every bit of research that I had done, and it's gone on for years after that, because I don't think you know this, but for a number of years before I went to law school, I used to teach childbirth classes, labor assistant and stuff. And so I did a lot of research. I haven't looked at any new research, but back at that time, even the American Academy of Pediatrics statement on it was there is no drug that has been proven to be safe for an unborn child when taken by its mother during pregnancy and labor. That was what I'm quoting from what I knew of what the American Academy of Pediatrics was saying at that time. And I just decided for me that I did not want to take the chance of taking a drug that was going to cross the placenta, get into my child, and if something went wrong with that child, to never know if it was because of something that I took for my safe, my comfort. And so I did a lot of practice and studying and all that sort of thing to learn other mechanisms for coping with the pain of childbirth. That was my decision, that I felt like it was the right thing, the best thing for my child. And again, I don't want to condemn anybody else. I don't want to come across like I'm passing judgment on other people. I totally get it. Like I said, I taught childbirth classes for years. I've been with lots and lots of laboring women and have gone through it 5 times myself. I get it. And if you feel like this is the right choice for you, then everybody needs to do what they think is right for themselves and their child.
Right. And I'm in total agreement, because I've taught childbirth classes for years and been a birth doula. And I think the hardest part is that we are so worried and concerned about making the next mom feel guilty, which is never our intention.
Right.
That what happens sometimes is that the informed decision kind of gets pushed aside because we're afraid of making people feel guilty.
Yeah.
And so I think, you've qualified yourself several times. I totally get it. I think the audience is getting it, that, this is your personal choice based on what you've learned. But I also think it's always like I already knew the answer because I've been a childbirth educator, but I like to hear what other people have learned and why they made those decisions. And you said your friend Vicky, it's almost as like if Vicky was doing it and you respected her, it was something that you were going to seriously consider. And if you didn't have a Vicky, you may have been floundering a whole lot. And so I think it's nice for moms to hear, like, you are the Vicky. So they're hearing you talk about how well researched you were, why you came to certain conclusions. And I like to be able to share that with the audience, because I'm always looking to give people things to think about. So thanks for answering that question.
Yeah. And there's some the fact is, and this because of what your own experiences and the work you've done. I think most young women of childbearing age in the 21st century are absolutely terrified of giving birth. And they want to and what the experience is going to be like. And they want to grab on to anything that they think is going to help them survive that experience. And when people and doctors and everybody else are promoting, whether it's the epidural or whatever, as this is going to solve this problem for you and it's going to be fine, it's easy to grab onto that. There's relief there. The rest of it I don't want to know about, sort of the don't ask, don't tell philosophy of childbearing. And
sure.
I think you can't make an informed decision unless you have all the facts and all the information, and then whatever decision you make can be informed.
Right. So you're just like me. You're all about giving the information and then, remaining unbiased as to non-judgmental as to what other people's decisions are. And then when we're birth doula, et cetera, then we respect their choices and help them to do whatever it is that their choice is.
And I was fortunate because I was able to find, by doing my research, that there are other ways to cope with the experience of giving birth outside of drugs that for me were too risky.
Now, I'm going to guess because X amount of years ago, there was probably, thank you, Dr. Lamaze on the shows. I think Bradley was probably out at that point. So
yeah, I taught the Bradley method.
Okay, yeah. So you used a lot of deep breathing and positional changes and all that for
relaxation techniques,
right? Yes, perfect.
And training the coaches. That was the big piece of it. Whether it was dad or a friend or a sister or whoever, everybody who came to my classes brought somebody with them that was going to be their coach. And my biggest job, I felt, was training the coach of what the alternatives were and here's what's going to happen. Here are some tools you can use to help her through that.
Right. And we're going to get into it a little bit more, but I would also tell people that this is for the birth. That is what we were focusing in on. But there's going to be breastfeeding afterwards. There's going to be postpartum afterwards. And there's going to be many other opportunities for you to use these skills in addition to the 24, 36, 48 hours that you're in labor. So, pay attention because these are great life skills.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because you could use the relaxation techniques you use to cope with contractions come in real handy after the birth when baby latches on and your nipples are sore or when your uterus is contracting or any of those things. I use those same breathing and relaxation techniques during those times.
Oh, boy, did I use it when my uterus was contracting. So tell me a little bit about your first baby, what their name was, and how the first couple of days of breastfeeding went for you.
Well, our oldest child is Rachel, our daughter, oldest daughter. Boy, the first couple of days of breastfeeding, I had talked to the nurses, knew that was my plan. And I'm trying to remember way back because she's 35 years old now and a mom herself. But I do remember the nurses were very helpful for me and getting her to latch on. She kind of knew what to do. And I think the fact that I had, there had been no drugs in our system helped with that. She was alert enough and able to latch on. But, it was something new for me I hadn't done. And so the thing I remember the most vividly from that, there's two things, actually. One of them was, after a day or two, my nipples getting sore until they toughened up enough. But the other one was, she must have been 2 or 3 days old because I was home. I think it might have been my first night home from the hospital. And my mom had come over to stay with us in our little apartment where we live. And she found me in the middle of the night standing at the baby's crib looking at her. And she said, she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "My milk has just come in. I'm dying here, but she's not awake. I'm just hoping she's going to wake up pretty soon." And my mom says, "Well, just pick her up and feed her." And I was like, I can do that? I thought I had to wait for her to wake up. She had picked that night to sleep a little longer. So those were kind of two of my vivid memories from that first week or so of getting used to this and learning that, look, if I need some relief because I'm, completely engorged, it's okay to pick the baby up and offer to breastfeed for my relief.
Well, and that is so funny. And I think any of my listeners who have been through that, however many years ago it was, whether it was last month, last year, or 20-something years ago, you could already feel that. You could see yourself and you could feel your breast being so full and saying, "Baby, I need you."
Yeah. Help me out here.
We're just so dogmatic, or, we just don't know that. I mean, I really love that story. You're sitting there dying and you're just waiting for your cute little baby to wake up to give you some relief. And here your mom comes in, the voice of, just being natural and experienced and saying, "Well, just pick her up and feed her." It
was pretty comical. But it was a good lesson for me that, the baby can adjust to my schedule as well as I can adjust to hers. So.
Yeah. And just to throw in just a little tip for some of my listeners that I will also tell them, if for some reason you don't want to wake your baby up, then you can always hand express some milk. So I talk to moms all the time about hand expression to just take that pressure off while you're waiting for your baby. But these are all those things that you just, it's like trial by fire. You just learn as you go.
Well, sure. When you're 20 years old and haven't had a child before, or if you're 35 and have your first child, you don't know if you haven't been through those experiences. It's not something that women necessarily talk about to someone who hasn't had a child yet. And so you're not going to learn it until you've experienced it.
Right. And I mean, just, it's like the most mind-blowing thing what happens to our bodies during pregnancy, during birth, and then postpartum. And when we're breastfeeding, like whoever thunk something like this would have happened to your breasts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a learning experience. That's for sure.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, is there anything else that sticks out in your memory banks with nursing Rachel? Did you feel like you had plenty of milk? She was gaining well and was a content, thriving baby?
Yes, to all the above. And that reminds me of another story about nursing her, a lesson that I had to learn. I had plenty of milk. We went through a period of time. Mike and I were both in college at the time, and we had set up our schedules so that he went to class in the morning and I stayed home with the baby. And then he'd come home in the afternoon and I'd go to class. So I'd scheduled all my classes for that first semester after she was born to be in the afternoon. And so I would nurse her right before I left, then run to class and, usually was back in 3.5 hours or so. For a period of time, I learned that I had to nurse her basically without my clothes on, because I would nurse her on one side, put her up to burp her, nurse her on the other side, and then she would just projectile. It would all come back out all over me. So after having to change my clothes, again to go to class, I got to where I was just nursing her in my underwear, basically.
The light bulb goes off and you're like, why am I doing this?
She just was a little piggy and she would just nurse very enthusiastically, and I'd let her go until I finally, had my next doctor appointment with her and talked to the doctor about what was going on. And it was the pediatrician who said, well, just nurse like 5 minutes on the first side and then switch her to the other side and nurse her a little. She's just a piggy. She'll keep nursing until she's too full in that case. So we kind of learned a system to where she quit doing that. But it was
also, I'm just curious. So it was really actually pretty great that you were able to work around both of your schedules. Was there any consideration or any time that you did remove some milk by hand or pump to put in a bottle for her during those early days?
With some of my later kids, for various reasons, I did that. But I have to confess that through 5 kids, I never was very good at pumping milk. I mean, by my 5th one, I had to be away for like a day when he was just a few months old to take the law school admissions test, and then another week to take another exam. And so I was able to express enough milk to kind of cover him for while I was gone. But with Rachel, I don't think we ever did. And I don't think we ever, our schedule was such that I didn't need to.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually pretty cool because when you speak to breastfeeding moms, probably if breastfeeding is going well and easy and convenient for them, one of their least favorite things to do is to be pumping. And of course, there's many women now who do because they're separated from their baby for, an average 8 or 9 hour workday, and they have to. So do you remember how long you breastfed her for?
She weaned herself at about a year, and over. So she was exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months. That's all she had. And then right at about 6 months, we started, with introducing solids, cereal and those different kind of things. Over the next 6 months, she would, kind of drop a feeding, one of the feedings during the day. And then the more she was eating solid food, she'd drop more feedings. But so by the end of the year, she was nursing, like at nap time and at bedtime and maybe first thing in the morning. But she just gradually lost interest. So at about a year. And it was similar with all my kids.
Do you have anything that stands out with nursing your 5 kids that you wanted to share? Any funny stories or something that was way different than the others?
Some of the things that kind of come to mind are times when I've needed to, nurse when I've been out in public and trying to find a way to do that discreetly and where I could relax. I remember a time, and this was again with Rachel, when she was, I want to say 5 or 6 months old, maybe. We moved cross country, and couple sort of funny and one way sort of terrible. I hesitate to say this. Couple things happened, but we were moving with another family. And so we had several vehicles. We were kind of caravanning across country to move somewhere to start a church. And I was driving one of our vehicles. Mike was in a car with somebody else talking to them. Rachel decided she needed to nurse. Well, this was in 1981. Nobody had cell phones back then. I had no way to tell people we need to pull over, the baby needs to eat. Shannon, this girl, basically picked her up because, again, people didn't do car seats much back then. This is horrible.
I know, we're really dating ourselves, right?
I know. So we had kind of made a bed for Rachel in the back seat where it was all like full of things and we cushioned it and everything. Shannon picked up the baby, handed her to me while I'm driving. We were out in the middle of nowhere. And basically, she sort of held her for me so she could nurse while I drove, which is terrible, but it worked. I mean, we all survived. She's 35 and none the worse for it. So that was one kind of story. And another one on that same trip, we were at a campground somewhere and baby needed to eat. And so I was kind of sitting off to the side because there was nowhere private to go. And I had a receiving blanket kind of covering her and was nursing her as discreetly as I could. And some random older gentleman came up, while I was there. And he said, I don't want to be rude, but I just wanted to say you just have the most peaceful expression on your face. And I just think it's beautiful what you're doing there.
Aww.
I mean, he couldn't see anything, so I knew he wasn't being lecherous or anything.
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, he was kind of just looking at you, and you're right. You probably look very peaceful, and he knew what you were doing, but he wasn't. It's not like he was a peeping Tom or anything.
No, not at all.
It's the same thing. Like, I remember my father, he didn't know anything from breastfeeding women because his wife, my mother, didn't, and nobody else in his world ever did. And when I started breastfeeding my baby, I remember he started to think about things. You could see the wheels turning in his head, and he was like, I bet you there are many times when I just smiled at a mom and I said, oh, your baby is so beautiful, or you look so peaceful, because he would do those things. And he would say, I bet you half of those times they were probably breastfeeding their baby. And I didn't know it. And I said, you're right, Daddy. You have no idea what they were really doing. If they were, discreet and holding their baby close, and you just saw her just sitting there with a calm, probably smile on her face. And you just, it's like truly when people do have a pregnancy glow, you just kind of you see it from afar. So that's probably what this gentleman saw. So that's really nice. Well, I have a couple of things, but from the generation now are probably flipping out at the story of breastfeeding a baby while driving and no car seat. But I have to tell everybody and remind people that it was certainly not anything that was illegal. It was not illegal to not have your baby in a car seat. It was not illegal to not have a seatbelt on, period.
Oh, yeah. Some cars didn't even have seatbelts back in those olden days.
Exactly. So
I'm not recommending what I did.
You're a mother of 5 and you're a grandmother of 7. So now, knowing what you know now and that it's the law, you would never, ever put one of your grandchildren in your car without being buckled in the proper car seat, et cetera. But I'm just, I just want people to think about back then, there were not even seatbelts in some cars. It was not illegal to not put your seatbelt on. My mother used to have just one of those straw baskets that she used to put on the car seat and put her kids in.
Yeah.
There are many things that they did different that we say now, my goodness, if you did that now, you would probably be arrested. But my mother talks all the time about how raising children in Brooklyn, they would walk the carriages up and down the avenue and with friends, and they would leave all the carriages in front and go into the luncheonette and have an eggnog or something. And the babies in the carriages and everybody was there when they came out. It just, now people, their heart goes into their stomach at the mention of that.
Yeah.
And,
it's a
you want to call
world.
A very different world. I mean, you'd want to call CPS on them now, but it's a very different world. So I can picture you driving down very desolate roads with the baby being held at your boob and breastfeeding her, letting her get her meal, and then putting her back on the chair in her blankets.
And it wouldn't have been my choice, but I literally had no way to signal. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have GPSs. I didn't have a map in my car. I was following the cars ahead of me, and it just happened when that occurred. I was the last car there were 3 or 4 cars driving. And if I had pulled over, they might not have seen me. And I had no idea how to get where we were going.
So yeah, you had no choice, but you also probably also didn't think too much of it. Your probably biggest question was, well, how am I going to hold her and drive? And your friend solved that one. So there you go.
One does what one must, I guess.
Yeah. So, we're talking about many things that are different from then and now. And so, when you were raising your kids, were you around other people or were you getting influenced by anybody? Maybe it was even your own fears, like you're breastfeeding your kids, because a lot of people continue to hear even now that they need to stop breastfeeding by a certain point. Otherwise, their children will never drink from a cup or they'll never want to go away to kindergarten. They're just going to be these dependent little people if you keep them close, if you sleep with them in the same room. So is there any things like that when you were raising your children that you had concerns about that you kind of look back now and think, I didn't even need to worry about that all those years?
Well, again, I point to my friend Vicky and some other young moms who were, a few years ahead of me that I watched and learned from. Of course, I worried. I think it's what we do as moms. We're always afraid we're doing it wrong and that we're going to ruin our children's lives if we make the wrong choice. Now, I think there's dads care about their kids too, but it's a different experience for them. I don't think they second guess their every choice the way we do as moms, and especially as young moms. And so there were lots of things I worried about. Am I doing this right? Breastfeeding for the period of time that I did or was going to, I don't think I worried as much about because I had watched Vicky go and some of my other friends, but by then Vicky had a couple of kids and she had, I kind of asked her lots of questions. I read lots of books and, I made my decisions about, having them exclusively breastfed for a period of generally it was 6 months because at least back then they said what I read and what I learned was if you don't, the longer you wait, the less likely they are to develop food allergies, especially like with milk, dairy, those kinds of things. And so that was my reason for doing that. And it was frankly more convenient not to have to mess with other stuff. I always had their food with me, and they were always with me. So their food was always ready to go. I worried though about just making the right choices in general as a mom. And I think we all do that.
Yeah. And you probably realize in hindsight that for the most part, you weren't going to go too far off the beaten path.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the things that I've learned from having raised 5 kids to adulthood is that kids are much more resilient than we give them credit for. They're not, certainly they can get hurt if we drop them. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think what small children need most of all is to know that they're loved. And that covers the multitude of sins, whatever mistakes we make as moms, as long as our kids know we love them and we're there for them and we're caring for them, the rest of the stuff all shakes out over time. I don't think I knew that as much when I was younger as I see now. When I gave birth to each of my kids, I didn't want them out of my sight. It took a long time before I could leave the room to just go take a shower. I just needed them to be close to me. And gradually over time, of course, they moved out to their own room. But for the first weeks, they slept in a bassinet right next to my bed with my hand on them and sometimes in the bed in between us. And there's lots of controversy, I guess, over that. But I just tried to do what was working for us. And when you're exhausted and Rachel wasn't this child, but I had subsequent kids that were, sometimes up every 2 hours wanting to nurse, you got to get some sleep. And if that means I'm going to put the baby between me, and so all I have to do is between my husband and me, and all I have to do is roll over and feed him without getting out of bed, then that's what I did.
That is another whole topic, and I've done several shows on that. And, but one of the big things about that is people are so afraid to take their babies in bed with them and co-sleep safely that they will get up, go to another room, sit on a couch or a chair and feed their baby and then literally fall asleep in an unsafe place.
Yeah.
Where more can happen in that unsafe place where they can roll onto the couch in between the cushions than safely sleeping in the bed with them. So, and you're right. It's a matter of survival. And it's only in the last 75 years or so that we started taking our babies out of bed and putting them in their own rooms. For a gazillion years, mothers all slept with their babies in the same room. So, But it's interesting that you say that because you're just, you're saying it was easy, it was convenient, and you were able to get sleep. And again, you have 5 kids later. And I really agree with what you say. That's something that I tell parents all the time that are so nervous about making mistakes. And I will often say, your children need to know that they are loved unconditionally, and then everything else will work its way out.
Yeah. I could not agree more. The one thing I know about parenting, that I know for sure, that kids who know that they're loved, the rest of the stuff is all going to be okay. I actually asked my kids recently, nowadays everybody's connected by texting and stuff. And I sent a group text to my kids just asking them, and they're all over the country now and they're adults and 2 of them have kids of their own and stuff. And I asked them, I know Dad and I made lots of mistakes when you were growing up. Does anything come to mind that we did right? And of course, because they're our kids, there were some really sarcastic answers to start with. But then my older son, Matthew, who's 34 years old and sailor in the United States Navy, and he's married and has 3 little boys of his own, he made a comment about how he remembered certain things that we always did together, that we always, we ate dinner together, or the other kids piped up with, yeah, you always took us with you wherever you went. I never felt like we were in the way. We just always did stuff together. Those were a couple of the things that they said that really kind of surprised me, especially coming from my sailor son,
Again, that just tells me what I truly believe is that I know that it's unconditional love. I use those words, but what they're using different words in storytelling and saying specific incidences. But that's really what it is they're saying, that they know that they were loved unconditionally. You wanted to be with us. You took us everywhere. We did all kinds of stuff. That is unconditional love, different than messages some other kids get. Be quiet, be good, you're in the way, you need to do what I want you to do in life, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's what makes all the difference. I remember even with my 4th and 5th child, at the time they were born, my husband is a musician and he produced a big benefit concert every year. And I was one of the backup singers, and it was at the big theater in Omaha where we live, in the theater where the opera performs and stuff like that. And so there are dressing rooms underneath the stage, and I had an infant but needed to be on stage. So I actually would bring a friend's teenage daughter to the concert with me to stay down in my dressing room and look after the baby. So he or she, because 4 and 5 are a girl and a boy, were right there. And in between like acts, when there was a break, I could run down there and nurse them if they needed to be nursed. So they grew up in situations like that, in the dressing room at a theater with other performers coming in and out. And they knew they were part of our life and the most important part of our life.
That is such a perfect example in what we're trying to get across to parents who might be nervous about different ways of parenting, is that really the kids are just, they're like your right arm or your right leg while we're raising them, and they're just part of the family. They don't need to be separate. They should be pretty much, able to go mostly any places with you and to do mostly anything, reasonable with you. And I think we just have so many worries. And I know a lot with breastfeeding moms that I work with, they are so overly concerned, and part of it is them, but part of it is what I think their perception of others, because I think in many ways we are not necessarily the most family friendly United States anymore. I think that, that causes problems. So I get asked things like, one of the latest ones is I have to go to my husband's Christmas party, and so I'm going to need to pump and leave my baby. And I think, like many years ago, it may have been you brought the babysitter with you who watched the baby along the side. And, whether people want to do that or not, I think there's also some people who think, well, that's not a choice because this is an adult Christmas party, and they probably won't welcome my child. And what I'm saying is that's when I say I don't think we're as family friendly as we used to be, because that's exactly what you might have done in that instance. I imagine if that were you, you would think, oh, well, okay, so I think I'll need to hire a babysitter for the night to come along with us to watch my baby and, along the side, and I could be with the adults and they can be watching the baby, maybe right alongside us, but I can still have my fun and be available to nurse the baby when I need to. And it doesn't have to be a whole big thing.
Well, and there's a perfect example of that with our middle child, who was of all my kids, kind of the biggest challenge as an infant. He was, and there are reasons why I think that might have happened that had to do with his birth. When he was just maybe 3 or 4 months old, my husband had a contractor invite us to fly to Chicago to come to their company holiday party because he had hired them for a bunch of work and they wanted to thank him. And they invited me to come along. And of course, the baby had to go. And so we went, we had dinner with some people and they wanted us to come to, I was just going to stay at the hotel during the actual Christmas party because I had this infant with me. And at dinner the night before that was mentioned and they said, no, just bring the baby with you. I mean, and this was a big fancy dress Christmas party for this company. And we were like, well, and they insisted. So we got him this cute little outfit to wear. We dressed up and we go to this party with all of these, turned out a bunch of pretty wealthy, older, distinguished men and women, all in their fancy sequined outfits and stuff. And here we came in with this baby and all of these women were like taking the baby and carrying him around with their hairdos and their, their sequined gowns, wanting to carry the baby and show him to each other. And that was a perfect example of a very child-friendly, family-friendly event.
So no babysitter. It's like everybody was the babysitter.
Everybody was like, oh, here, let me hold the baby while you eat. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much of it's a cultural thing because as it happens, that company was owned by a Greek family. And I think the Greek culture, at least back then, was very family oriented. And maybe that was some of it. But there was no question in their mind of why is this woman here with this infant? They were just, he was part of the party, part of the entertainment, I guess.
That story makes me very, very happy to hear. And that's really what I'd like to see happen a lot more with the generations that are raising their children, a lot more family friendly. I'm saying I think we complicate things too much. And as you were telling me that story, I was already thinking, I don't think she brought a babysitter. I think everybody just watched the baby, letting you eat, letting you dance, letting you whatever. And then they passed the cute baby to the next person and everybody had a great time. And you didn't have to be stressed out and you didn't have to sit in a hotel room by yourself while other adults were at a nice dinner.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I had forgotten about that until you mentioned the Christmas party thing, but that was a perfect example of what turned out to be a wonderful evening. And they all were so happy and thanked us for bringing the baby.
Aw, yeah, I'm sure it added to the whole party atmosphere. And you know what? Nothing makes people happier, most people, I should say, than having a little baby around.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm sitting here thinking, and, with your 5 children and 7 grandchildren, and I met you, Laura, from the mastermind that we're in with Natalie Ekdahl from the Biz Chicks. And we're in a mastermind, and you have a podcast called The Productive Woman. So my mind is bouncing back and forth, like with raising these children and being the productive woman. I want you to talk a little bit about your podcast and your business. And so I don't know if your podcast came as a result of everything that you learned when you were a mom and an attorney and raising children and trying to fit it all in, or did you incorporate things that you learned and taught yourself? Or was this all way after the fact that you started to learn in your adult life how to be different tips and tricks on how to be productive as a busy person?
Well, that's such a great question. I mean, frankly, I have always been kind of a productivity nerd. Even clear back in middle school, I would, go to the library and check out books about time management. And I've always loved calendars and checklists and stuff like that. And so it's just a natural interest of mine. But I think it turned out to be a really good thing because when you are raising 5 kids, and then going back to college as an adult with 5 kids in law school and doing all these things, you've got to be pretty organized and you've got to have some tools in your toolbox for managing the demands of being a mom and a lawyer or a mom and a student and a wife and, all the other things that I do. So I certainly did learn a lot over the years, both because I would read about it and study about it, but also just putting things into practice of how do I get this stuff done and not lose my mind or what's left of it. And then over the course of the years, other people would come to me, would see, well, that seems to be working. You're getting stuff done. How do you do that? And so the podcast was kind of born out of that natural interest of mine, something I've spent my life kind of learning different ways of maximizing your time and your energy and all those things. When I decided I thought I'd like to do a podcast as something different from practicing law, it was the obvious topic for me to talk about. And so a lot of what I've learned goes into the show.
What you started off putting out in the show, has that evolved into what you thought people would have wanted and needed to know, and evolved into what the feedback is about what they're telling you that they need to know? And is that something different?
It's kind of all of the above. I thought when I launched the show that it was going to be more about nuts and bolts of about how to set goals or what calendar to use and how to manage your time. And I do a lot of that, but from the feedback from listeners and my own life experience, it has turned into where a lot more of the show is about mindset kinds of things, because productivity really starts with a mindset. Although I never have intended to exclude men from the conversation, I feel like women have a different experience of productivity issues than men do. The concepts are the same across the board, and the tools, many of them are the same, but women experience it differently. And this goes back to what I said about, how we feel as young moms. There's something in us as women often that we feel like whatever it is we're doing, we're not doing it right. And so a lot of what I talk about on the show is encouraging women that, listen, if what you're doing works for you, then it's right. It's fine. There's no law that says you've got to use this app or that approach. And I feel the same way about parenting, that if it's working for you and your kids are thriving, then it's fine. Men don't seem to get as hung up on, is this the right way to do it, as women do. They seem to just intuitively feel like, well, if it's working for me, so it must be fine. Whereas we're always second guessing every choice we make. So a lot of the podcasts now, we get into those sorts of mindset things of what does it mean to be productive, and how do I define what's the right way to do things for me?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. When I first started to listen to your show, my inkling was that it was more about brass tacks. Here's how you go about things, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And there are definitely times in my life and projects that I'm doing that I need that. But whatever I'm doing in my life, I always find out that even if I didn't go into it thinking that way, that I tend to start looking for that female voice in whatever it is. And so that's what's really attracted me to keep listening to your podcast, is that you're saying these things, but you have the female voice in there. And well, you get it. You understand the differences. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And we could go on and on about that subject, about why we think differently. But the fact of the matter is that for those of us who do think differently, we then really appreciate and can respond to advice more so with the female voice running through it than we can with that male voice, that male way of thinking things. It's just this way. We just do it 1, 2, 3, boom, we're done. There's no second guessing. There's no analyzing. There's no trying to figure out 5 different ways and all the what ifs. And we're not, they're not so emotionally attached to it. And I think, you're going to have to say the number because I don't remember, but your very last show, I remember you saying a few things, and I know you were I think teary, and you had me in tears. It's like you really had the microphone and you were really speaking to just one woman across the table from you. And yet it was pretty much of a global information and mindset that you wanted us to think about, and reminding us that, whatever we do, if it's working for us, then it's working, and that what we're doing and it's good enough. And again, I think that's one reason why I lean towards midwifery. When I have a physician, I kind of lean towards a female. When I have an accountant, if I had my druthers, I'd have a female. And I'm not saying that always has to be, but I just find that there's something missing there when that's not it. And I really do enjoy all the productivity tips that you do share, but that it is with that female voice there.
Well, and I think there's some real truth there. My observation has been, and there are lots of people who want to talk about the productivity space, lots of people teaching about that. There's a preponderance of what I would say youngish men speaking about this. And they do tend to have an approach of, here's how you do it. This is what you need to do. My approach is, and this is true of productivity. It was true when I taught childbirth classes. It was true in any area. Let me show you some alternatives. One of these probably will work for you, but there's not a right way to do it. You know, I just try to offer lots of information so you can make a decision based on what resonates with you. And that's how I teach productivity. It's how I taught childbirth. It's just, I don't think there is a single right answer that works for everybody. I just don't believe that.
There's good information with all of it. Mm-hmm. And again, there's that acknowledgement. I think that it just comes through because you're a female and you're attached to it, that we have an emotional mind attached to everything that we're doing, and that we always have to keep that in mind. And you're making compensation for that, not to let anybody off the hook, just in an understanding about it all.
Yeah.
So tell us, what are some things that you're currently doing with the podcast or in your business?
I think the episode you were talking about was the last one I did for 2016, which was episode 120. I'm right now, as we're recording this, I'm kind of in the middle of my year-end hiatus where I'm making plans for the coming year. Intend to keep putting out new episodes of the podcast. This year I launched mastermind groups, productivity mastermind groups that are just small groups of women. I don't accept more than 5 in a group, that we meet weekly for 12 weeks online, in a video conference kind of thing, and encourage each other in accomplishing the goals that each woman sets for herself. And I'm loving doing that. Those are, they're paid mastermind groups. I facilitate them, and the women really hold each other accountable and support and encourage each other in a way that I'm just loving. And I've gone through, I think, 2 sessions of those multiple groups, and the women who have met in these groups are still staying connected and still encouraging each other, even though our mastermind has ended. So I love that. I plan to keep doing that in the coming year, and I have some other projects in the works. I'm working on a goal-setting workbook that I hope to put out in 2017. Just watching and, interacting with the listeners and seeing how I can better serve the women who listen to the show.
If I didn't know anything about the Productive Woman and your masterminds, I might think that because you're an attorney, that the groups that you're putting together, are they only for attorneys or professional women?
Oh, no, I've got, that's been part of the fun of it. Every group, even though there's only 5 women in each group, 5 women plus me, they span the spectrum. They're everything from a young woman just out of college who's got her first job and, she's not married yet. She's just on her own for the first time, to older women who are right on the verge of retirement, who've been professional, to stay-at-home moms, to physicians. I've had this last session I had 3 different groups going, and in 2 of them, 2 separate groups, there were doctors, one in Canada and one in the United States, self-employed women, just all ages, all spectrum, all across the spectrum in terms of experience and multiple continents. I've had some women from Australia in one of the groups, and this coming January, when this airs, I'm not sure when you plan to publish this, but in the beginning of 2017, I'll have women in those groups from Australia, from Ireland, from Canada, and various states within the United States. But really, that's one of the advantages of the group, is you've got different experiences and different age groups and different backgrounds bringing their perspective to whatever your productivity challenge is, or your life challenge that you want support in.
I mean, there are many things about loving groups that I'm in that have people from all over the world in it. Probably the biggest thing is it just continues to help me reduce judgments about what I have about other people and the lives that they live. Once I start to learn about their life, their challenges, their culture, their relationships, their working habits. And because otherwise I could just speak for myself. I'm in my own little bubble. And, I think that my way is the right way. Not that I'm purposely going around saying that, but it's something that's internal. And that's the the self-talk that I do. But the more I meet people from all over, the more that world is opening up and the broader spectrum my self-talk becomes, and the definitely less judgmental that I am. And I'm always working on that, because I tell you, I could be in my own head, my own little bubble with that. So
if you join a group, a mastermind type group like this, there's so much value to be gained just from the variety of perspectives that are going to be brought to bear on whatever question you come to the group with. If there's something you're struggling with, to have somebody who's in a completely different stage of life, different profession, different whatever, listening to you describe what this challenge is. And they'll come up with, well, have you considered this? And you realize, no, never thought of that. Would never have crossed my mind. But because of their background, their experience, their point of view or whatever, they're able to bring some wisdom to your challenge that you just wouldn't have found otherwise. If you get around a bunch of people that are all just like you and at the same stage of life and everything else, they may not have that fresh perspective, that fresh set of eyes to bring to the challenge.
Yeah. And then there's never any controversy or anything, any people challenging the way that you're thinking, because, hey, great, everybody's patting you on the back. Hey, I would have done the same thing. Well, that's not really necessarily so helpful in the direction. Yes.
Yes. If we all are of the same mind, some of us are extraneous.
Exactly. First of all, I want you to, I want everybody to listen to The Productive Woman, and you can get that on. You're on all the iTunes and Stitcher and
various places.
Various places. But if they wanted to connect with you to find out more about the groups that you're facilitating, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, the easiest way to find me is to go to the website, which is at theproductivewoman.com. And there's a contact page there where you can send me a message, but there's also, you can find my email address there, and just, where I am on Twitter and all those kinds of things. So the website's the easiest. That's kind of the hub where all the ways to contact me are found.
Okie doke.
I love hearing from people. I like doing the productivity stuff, but I got to tell you, Lori, I love new moms. I love them. And so I'd be delighted to hear from any of your listeners.
Yeah. And not that that's necessarily what your group is about, but, there was so much that we didn't get to talk about. Everything with mothering. We just talked about breastfeeding, but, we know that you're a childbirth educator and a doula. And if I remember correctly, you've had a few babies at home.
My last two were born at home. Yeah.
Your last two were born at home. So
on purpose.
I know that's what sometimes you wind up telling people on purpose, because otherwise people think it's an accident, right?
You just didn't leave in time. No, it was intentional.
So, I would love to hear more about that. When I'm talking to other women on the podcast, my listeners have heard me say this before. I have Post-it notes that tell me to stay on track, because there are so many things that I love to talk about in addition to breastfeeding. But I always have to remember that, this show is about breastfeeding. And do I want to hear about your two home birth stories? Absolutely. But that's not the point right here, right?
Well, we can chat anytime you want, Lori. So.
We will, because I'm another birth junkie. I love it. So is there anything else about mothering that you wanted to share to leave us with, and or about your business that I didn't ask you?
I think I would just say something that I said earlier, but I really want to emphasize this to the women who listen to a show like yours. They're probably breastfeeding moms, and maybe it's their first time around, and all those doubts and questions that we talked about. And I just want to encourage them that you're probably doing fine, that there's, looking around to see what everybody else is doing might make you crazy, because if you're checking out their Facebook posts and their Instagram photos, you think everybody else's life is perfect and you're the only one struggling. And the fact is, we all struggle, but our kids are resilient. And as long as they know we love them, I just have to come back to that. That's the thing they need most, is your heart, your embrace, and the rest of it will all work out.
Yep. In the words of the Beatles, all you need is love.
In the case of moms and kids, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, and for sharing some personal information that I know that are going to benefit many, many people who listen to this show. Thank you so much, Laura.
Oh, it was a privilege and my pleasure. Thank you, Lori.
Have you heard that Phoenix, Arizona is blessed with an amazing birthing center? Baby Moon Inn Birth Center is the best option for families who want access to midwifery care in and out of a hospital setting. You can experience birth in a comfortable home-like setting where natural birth is the focus. Laboring in water, being able to walk outside during labor, and enjoy the beautiful garden. This is what birth can be like for you. There is so much more to learn about Baby Moon. The staff would love to have the opportunity to meet you and would like to extend an invitation for you to attend a free Choices in Childbirth class and a tour of the birth center. All you need to do is call 602-314-7755. That's 602-314-7755 and ask for the tour dates. You can also go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast, and on the right-hand side of the page, you will see a link that will bring you to the calendar, and you can sign up for the tour yourself. When you come in for the tour, make sure that you tell them you found out about it from the All About Breastfeeding podcast, and you will be given a very lovely free gift.